Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Sanders, and my colleague, who is sitting here, as far as I can tell on this machine, is Pam Thomas. We are two of the three members of the CICMQ team. We run the Institute's quality accreditation program. I'm the head of accreditation. And Pam is one of the assessors. We, as you know, will be working with you guys in the coming weeks to get you through the CICMQ program. We were going to come up and do a launch with you guys, but just before the whole COVID-19 thing hit and lockdown hit. So we had to cancel that, but we're looking at running all of this stuff remotely, so we'll definitely be in touch with that as well. A couple of housekeeping things, if I may. If you could put yourself on mute, if you're not already on mute. I'm just going to mute Amy Pike, there we are. And anybody else who's not on mute, I'm going to mute you now. Scott, I'm going to mute you. It's just so that when we're speaking, we haven't got any background noise or Amazon delivering or barking dogs or anything like that, or somebody shouting downstairs, will you be quiet, which is what I get quite a lot. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. And we'll go, here we go. That's Clarke Willmott, share. Okay, you should now be able to see the wonderful Clarke Willmott logo. So today we were asked by Anna and the team at Clarke Willmott to put together a short presentation. It's going to be about 45 minutes thereabouts, and also it's open for questions as well about the impacts of what has happened for the lockdown on industry generally, on the credit management community. The pack that you're going to see is an amalgamation of lots of different things that we've done over the last few weeks. We've currently run, I think it's 25 Zoom sessions with altogether now 530 different credit professionals from different organisations all over the UK, and also we've had people dialing in from Dubai, USA, and all over the place. And this is to a degree an element of that. We've also pulled some resources from the internet so that you can see, and from corporate partners of the Institute, so you can see at a macro level what organisations have looked at and what they've done and why they are acting like they're acting. There's a document that we produced as a result of all of this, which I will send to Anna, which is called the COVID-19 Credit Managers Playbook. And essentially it's an amalgamation of many of the things that we've seen, and also some recommendations as to what organisations need to do. So I'll send that to Anna at the end of this, and she can distribute it to everybody as well. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, we're going to look at the external perspectives and what organisations are thinking and what they're doing and how they're acting. Some of them, as you probably know, have acted very well. Some of them, as you know, have acted very badly, and how that is going to probably potentially impact them as they come out of the crisis and come out of lockdown, which is slowly beginning to happen, as you know. What companies are doing, so external perspectives on industry, some things on company plans, what they're doing. And also some planning stuff for you guys, and where are we, what we need to do, some of the activities and strategies, etc., that we need to do to make sure that we keep the lights on, keep the business functioning, keep the cash coming in, etc., etc. So that's what we're going to talk about. We've also got a section about difficult customers. If you have any questions, as I said, please just ask us as we go through. Don't wait until we get to the end. Okay, so the first thing, I need to get this, there we go. The first thing, this is a slide that was put together after a survey from a company called High Radius. High Radius are an Indian-based software company. They are big on things like automation, robotic process automation, credit management systems, all of that kind of stuff. And they asked all of their clients, they asked them a survey and said, right, what are your problems, what are your issues, etc., etc. And this is the one pager, and I do love slides on one page. This is the one pager that really outlines the concerns of both the business and also the leaders within those businesses as well. If you look at the small bit, I'll just make it slightly bigger so that you can see that, hopefully. There we are. That's a little bit better. Okay, so So on the left-hand side of that slide there, you can see where it says top concerns, the COVID-19 effect. And it's really talking about order to cash, impact assessment survey insight. So this is the result of the survey that they've done. And if you look at that, the top concern that organizations had was their supply chain. In other words, the goods and products that they have coming in the front door, which then creates their own goods and products and manufacturing, and then they send them out the front door. And one of the interesting things about that is that in supply chain, from a medical supplies point of view, medical supplies, so things like PPE, face masks, etc., over 60% of the world's PPE is actually made in either India or China. And those two countries have, China's been in lockdown for some time, as you know, and India is in lockdown as well. So this is one of the reasons why we've had such a shortage of this. So supply chain is something else that now organizations are also trying to figure out which elements of their supply chain are still working. When a factory closes, it has an impact not only on the local economy, but on all of those businesses that run around it. So for example, when the Jaguar factory closed, all of the businesses surrounding it also were impacted as well. And then when Jaguar reopens, in modern business now, they look at just-in-time stuff. So stuff arrives in the front door and it's used almost immediately. So now they're having to sort of restart their organizations as well. So supply chain is a concern, making sure that their suppliers are paid and making sure that they've got the product in order for them to actually build stuff going forward. Cash forecasting. This has come up on every single call that we have done since we started doing this. The moment that lockdown was announced, the higher paid in all of the organizations suddenly found the phone number of the credit manager. And all of a sudden, that's the only phone number that they seem to use all day. All of the credit managers that we've spoken to are doing much, much more regular cash flow forecasting. As we've said, the only time that organizations really are concerned about cash is when it starts to run out. And this is very true this time round. Cash forecasting has become almost a daily occurrence with many organizations that we work with. Past due and overdue debt. If you think it through, when you're looking at what happened at the end of March, there was the sort of 20th towards the end of March, lockdown started happening and organizations started to close. Up until that point, they were still billing. So the billing that happened in March was still available for collection in April. However, at the end of April, now where we are now, and we're now in the middle of May, that billing has essentially dried up for a lot of organizations, which means that they've got to find the money to keep the lights on from somewhere. And they've got to keep the lights on by chasing down overdue debt and managing disputes and resolving disputes. Now that's fine. However, a lot of organizations, unfortunately, didn't really think through the whole furlough thing. And what's happened with some organizations, and we've seen it with a number of our clients, is that they furloughed because they thought, oh, we don't need the salespeople because nobody's going to be buying our stuff at the moment, so we'll furlough all the salespeople. And that's had a significant knock-on impact for managing past due debt and managing disputes, because the salespeople are a key source of information for those. Additionally, we had another client who thought that, well, we don't need the accounts department anymore, so we're going to furlough all of our accounts department. And what that meant was that as soon as they needed to do additional cash flow forecasting, they had nobody around to do it or knew how to do it. So some organizations jumped too soon. They didn't think through what they were doing before they actually decided to furlough great swathes of people. Finally, their operating expenditure, anything that's not nailed down really important and business critical, has basically stopped. And you would expect that to happen. When you need the cash to leave the lights on, you don't necessarily pay for the coffee machine. So it's about thinking about what organizations are having to pay for. If you look down the key challenges on the right-hand side there, the key challenges that organizations face and what leaders need help with are the things there. And if you look at what they need help with, they are all the stuff that credit managers need to do. Risk management, understanding what the risk is in your customer base now. Collections effectiveness, how are we going to collect the money with everybody sitting in disparate places all around the place, not actually in one building. remote working enablement. Now, that's been a challenge for some organizations. For some, it's been pretty good. It's been pretty easy. Equinix, which is a company that we work with, is a server-based organization. So they're like a data farm. They keep massive server farms everywhere that keep data for organizations like Vodafone and the government. They had pretty much everybody on laptops. So the moment that the whole thing kicked off, they literally just picked up and went home. And they were able to manage that very, very easily. So organizations that have thought through and done the investment in infrastructure, including things like broadband, local area networks, wide area networks, etc., to enable their staff to go off-site to work, that they've been fine. They've been quite robust and resilient in this process. Large organizations, traditional organizations as we would call them, organizations like, for example, utilities, water utilities, gas, electric utilities that have big offices with lots of people in them, mainly working on desktops, not laptops, and also with a demographic which is slightly older than many organizations and some younger companies. So in other words, people that have been working at the same place for 20 years, 30 years. They're used to going to the office and working at their desk and then going home. They've had one particular organization said that they had challenges in the fact that some of their staff didn't even have internet at home, some of the older members of staff. So they struggled to get people actually connected through internet. Also, one of our clients is actually in the Welsh Mountains, and the internet connection in the Welsh Mountains is not brilliant, to say the least. So half of their staff in the villages that live in the villages can't get internet or mobile services to forward their phones to. So it has been a challenge for some organizations. So remote working enablement has been tough. And also monitoring performance. How do you monitor somebody if you can't see them? Which is the old management style of looking at it, management by walking about, making sure people are doing their job, and it's been a different way of working now. So you're challenged now to figure out what people are doing, how they're doing it, what they need to do, etc. So monitoring of performance is very difficult. Now, the interesting thing is the monitoring of the performance is the middle managers group. So the middle managers, as we said slightly earlier, they're the ones that are stressed because they've got to perform regardless of what happens and where they are. They've got to collect the money. They've got to get the business and keep the business going, keep the lights on. So the ones in the middle are quite stressed. So from a monitoring and performance perspective, bear in mind, this is the first time that 90% of managers in the UK have ever had to do this to the same extent that they're doing now. So it's a very, very different way of working. This is what companies do generally. There's three things, and when you're looking at survival, there's three things, and they're all very much internally focused. The first thing is cash. You've got to keep the lights on. You've got to think about what the new tolerances are, what you're going to spend your money on, and what you're not going to spend money on. How much money do we need to run the business now? Right, and that's why organizations are looking at their cash forecasts again. They furloughed a whole bunch of people. They've shut some offices down. It changes the cash makeup of the organization and the cash requirements of the organization. So they're looking at new cash flow forecasts. What do they need to keep the business running? They have to pay suppliers for certain suppliers. They have to pay critical staff. They've got to make sure that their customer service staff are available, for example, to support their customers. New equipment. They've spent a lot of money on laptops, new broadband and the internet connections, mobile phones. Some people haven't got smartphones at home, and they need smartphones to help and forward emails to and also to forward their their office phones to. So supporting staff, new equipment. It's cash is required to do all of those things. The second thing is costs. They've got to manage their costs. New supplier payment purchasing terms. We've seen, and it came up yesterday, lots of organizations are now thinking, well, do you know what? We're just going to push out all of our payment terms unilaterally. We're just going to say, well, we're not paying you on 30 days now. We're going to pay you on 90 days because they're pushing this out. So there are new supplier purchasing terms now that are coming through that organizations are going to have to manage, and that obviously impacts the cash. So if you're a business, you want to collect the money as quick as you can, but you also want to push out all of your payment terms. And that's the working capital dilemma if you're in one place or another. And interestingly, I was speaking recently, I'm speaking next week at the Accounts Payable Association next week, which is going to be interesting. I'll be like Darth Vader in the middle of the Rebel Alliance. I don't think I'll get out alive if I was in a room. But what they're talking about is basically pushing out payment terms whilst the credit managers are trying to pull them in. Marketing and training has changed, as you've seen on TV now. You can buy a car online. You don't need to actually look at it. Okay, you can't drive it yet, but you can actually look around it. And I'm a bit of a Auto Trader geek. I tend to look at Auto Trader quite a lot, and the number of adverts that you now see where there's a 360-degree view of the car with a guy walking around the car with his camera phone looking at inside and sort of showing the car. All these adverts are changing now. Both and on TV as well. Training organisations to help people work remotely as well, and also the other training courses activity is basically stopped. New hires, organisations are still hiring new people. There's new people actually started at the Institute, but there's also new people starting in many organisations. My son is a recruiter in the IT space, and he's very busy at the moment. So he's recruiting people into organisations. Non-essential activities have basically stopped. So all of those projects that were so important in February and March for new processes and new systems and all that kind of stuff, if it doesn't keep the lights on, we're not interested. So lots of those things have been canned, and I believe a lot of them probably won't restart again. And so generally controlling spend. The third thing, so it's cash, keeping the lights on, cost, keeping your costs down. The third thing is people. How are you going to make sure that your people are operating, staying in touch, motivated, monitored, managed, and also redeployment of teams from one place to another. We spoke with HSC&I, the guys in Northern Ireland. They're the Northern Ireland NHS, and they've actually got credit controllers that are now working as delivery drivers for the NHS in Northern Ireland, and also working in the warehouses and moving product around rather than actually doing credit control. So organizations are redeploying their staff. So when you're looking at survival, it's very, very much an internally focused thing. When you're looking at coming out of this, it's externally focused. So organizations are now beginning to move, right, how are we going to now manage and try and trade out of this? So external focus for thrive. In other words, it's surviving and now thriving. But how you act now and in the survive mode will set the tone and possibly the outcome for how you carry on. So how you treat your customers now and how your customers are treated will depend on how you come out of this. So we've seen a number of organizations that have done this quite badly, and a number of organizations that have done it very well. When we were working with Shell, one of the things that Shell did when Hurricane Katrina hit, they just gave away fuel to the people in South America. Exxon, the local incumbent provider, wanted guarantees and cash up front. And as a result, they lost a lot of business when it all came out the other side. But Shell won a whole load of businesses. So it's how you act now and how you help people will make a difference. And we've been talking to most of our clients and recommending that you need to treat customers differently right now. So originally you're looking at cost, people, cash, process, and policies. You're now trying to trade out of this. You're looking at customers, sales, brand value, trust, and unique selling points, the things that make you want to buy your product. And supporting customers now through this whole process will build trust for the future. So originally it was 80% survive. How the hell are we going to get through this? Now it's 20% survive, and the planning has started to get organizations to come out the other side. And companies need to develop a new vision and a new strategy for that. Just doing things the way that they used to do it is very different. And if you, as a function, haven't got that business behind you that's telling you how to do this and advising you what to do, you need to think about that yourselves as credit managers and credit people. You need to think, right, how do we as a group come out of this and work well together? Pam.
Yep. Okay. All right. So when we spoke to Anna about delivering this session for you, we obviously had to understand a little bit about what you do. And we realized, we just put the slide up saying, know your customer. Now, obviously, you've got customers from all different walks of life there. And sometimes they're not directly your customers as such. So you're chasing money for your customers' customers as such. But one of the things that we always say is, do you really know who you're dealing with? So it's all about thinking, what industry are they in? We know that when we talk about thrive and survive, we know that there are some industries that are suffering really badly at the moment. Travel and tourism have been hit directly, so is leisure and sport. Construction was hit severely at the beginning, and now they've said that obviously building companies can start to go back to work, etc. But what else? Personal services as well. So some types of situations where perhaps like taxi firms or whatever, those kind of things suffering, really kind of struggling. But on the other hand, we mentioned a client of ours, Equinix, who are a technology company, and they're doing extraordinarily well. So are people like Zoom, who a lot of companies are using. Even the government's using Zoom to conduct their meetings from. Your food suppliers, medical suppliers. And if you remember, right at the very beginning of lockdown, there was this manic panic to get toilet paper, and you couldn't get toilet paper for love nor money. But now everything's kind of settled down now, hasn't it, as far as the shops are concerned. But yeah, there were industries that we recognize that are going to have problems with cash flow, and then there are companies that obviously won't. So we always say, check that you know your customers, you know, what industry are they in? Are they likely to come across being in one of those sort of types that are struggling, or are they thriving? So that will help you to decide what kind of strategy to make, and then you can sort of move through the ledger and really sort of get to understand what's going on. So if we look at the next slide, we talk about difficult customers. Now, if you've been doing credit and collections for a while or even a short time, you'll know that you always have the odd difficult customer. And we do tend to think a lot of customers are difficult because we're having to talk to them in the first place. So they haven't paid their money. Let's try and find out the reason behind that. So we understand that there will always be difficult times for different customers. It's no different. But at the moment, because of the situation, we know that some businesses are struggling, and therefore they might be more difficult to get hold of or to try and get cash out of. So we know that companies will have cash flow issues, and it could just be short term or it may be long term. And that if it's long term, maybe that's going to lead to them not being able to do any business any longer, because they might have to go into bankruptcy or insolvency, etc., etc. So if that is the case, and we know that there's a long-term financial situation, has the legal process already started, or is that something that may happen? And again, that will dictate how we approach that customer and how we work with them. One of the things that we have recognised, and most of the companies that we talk to have recognised, is that they're getting more and more queries and disputes. So when we talk about queries and disputes, it might be that the customer says, well, I don't agree the invoice because the pricing's not correct. So it could be stuff like that. And that could be normal for that customer and that product, etc. Or it could be that they're bringing up more, I guess, more and more problems that have to be solved behind the scenes. And again, you may or may not come across that with your customers that you're dealing with. One thing, again, that we have understood to be a bit of an issue is that sometimes we're not able to contact the customer. We mentioned about people working from home and having phones diverted. Some companies can't do that, depending on the situation with the person working from home, and sometimes emails as well. You can't get the right person. So we're aware of these kind of things happening. I don't know if this applies to you, but we were hearing that one of the things that customers started to do literally like a knee-jerk reaction to the COVID-19 situation was just to cancel any direct debits they had, or just not be able to pay for them. So again, you may or may not have come across that. Customer behavior, you might find that when you call someone, they are not very nice to you. They might be abusive, angry, emotional. Those customers, they are few and far between, but we kind of always remember them, don't we? Because of the way that they've affected us. So with that, you might have the angry, abusive, emotional customer, and it's just trying to handle that. Then you might have other things that are very specific to Clarke Willmott that you're coming across yourselves. So the next slide we're going to show you will talk about how we try to, I guess, segment our customers so that we can understand how to deal with them. So that's back to you, I think, Chris. Yeah. You're on mute.
On that direct debit point, what's interesting is, as we've mentioned about organisations and how they've invested in the past and what they've done, now it's organisations are beginning to recognise that certain elements of what they haven't done and things that they should have done are now impacting them. So, for example, one particular organisation has spent many years building and improving their direct debit penetration, getting more and more customers onto direct debit. What happened when the lockdown happened, as Pam said, many organisations just stopped their direct debits and cancelled them. Now, if you've got an automatic direct debit instruction system, or ALDIS as it's called, or paperless direct debit, you can phone the customer up and get that information, and you can now ask for that to be reinstated over the phone. Obviously, many organisations don't have ALDIS or paperless direct debit. So now what's happened is all of the work that they've done to get the direct debit penetration has now got to rely on the paper-based stuff that they've done before to start all over again. And it has something that has impacted quite a few organisations that don't have that. And that's an indication. The more automation that you had in this before this thing happened, the better and more resilient you are coming out of it. And this is, and also during it. So it's something that's very interesting that organisations have spotted, which is one of the reasons why credit managers are now saying, do you know what, we've got to, if we need to get more resilient now, we need to invest in this now. So organisations that are looking at cash, more importantly now, they're beginning to focus on, right, what do we need to do to make ourselves more resilient for the future, more systems, more automation, etc., etc. So this is something that we put together. This is from a company called Kinetic Consulting. I do work with Kinetic Consulting as well on their credit management practice, joint practice lead with them. And this was some stuff that we put together for some international clients. This was specifically in China and Saudi Arabia, because in China and Saudi Arabia, there's two things. The governments basically run the countries, and if you don't get paid by the governments, then it is very difficult for you to pay your suppliers. And one of the things that they wanted to understand was, well, how do we identify those customers that can't pay with those customers that won't pay? And this is an indication. This is a single chart. All consultants have a chart like this. If it appears in that, do this. If it's like that, do that. So this is an indication as to what we recommended to them. And this is a set of strategies that make sure that, that if something comes up, then you need to look at it. So if it's in the can't pay, won't pay box, then it's the things that sit around the edges of the box that you should consider doing. Like, for example, financing arrangements for invoice if you actually physically can't pay. But if you won't pay, it's more about agree and sign off action. So if you do something, you agree that, okay, if I do this for you, what are you going to do for me in terms of signing off for query resolutions, etc., etc. So it's just something that we thought we'd chuck in here, which might help organisations going forward to deal with some of the difficult customers there. Okay, Pam.
Okay, back to me. Okay, so what we recognise from the previous slide is that we will have customers that can't or won't pay. And what we try to do then is to put together a strategy of how we're going to work with them. And it might be that you might have had to temporarily change some of your operational ways of working. So, for example, it might have been that you could always telephone your customers. So you might not be able to, so can you email them? We recognize that emailing isn't always effective, but at the moment we know that probably it's one of the best means of communication because of the situation. So if you are going to email customers, then think about the way that you word something. And it might be that you're emailing somebody that doesn't normally do that job. Now, we mentioned earlier that companies are having to redeploy people. They may have furloughed some staff, and they may be working on a skeleton sort of staff strategy. So if you're emailing, think about that. Make it easy for the person picking up the email by just keeping it brief. If you've got a vendor number, if that's applicable, make sure that's in the title so that the person looking at the email can quickly see what you're talking about, because otherwise they may not recognize you, or they don't know why you're contacting them. So anything that you can do that they can pick up to make it easy for them. When you do, if you can call them, then remember that everything's about the human touch at the moment, and it always should be, as far as I'm concerned. But it might be that you just have to have a little chat just to, I guess, bring the rapport into being. Just ask them how they're doing. Do the soft approach in that sense, and then you can start to talk about their working routines, so you can understand a little bit about what their company is having to do to get around this situation. And you might be able to sort of say, well, are your routines any different, how they were previously? So are you still doing a payment run? You know, ask those kinds of questions. And you can always do that on an email as well. But it's just, I think usually if we can talk to people, then you get that intonation, and it's a bit warmer than the cold email as such. Okay, so the next slide that we're going to show you now talks about the relationships. So what I was saying on the previous slide was all about trying to make sure that we think about the other person on the end of an email or on the telephone. What we're saying here is it's all about relationships. And the first thing I've said there is it takes a long time to build trust and a moment to lose it. We do know that customer loyalty is critical to no matter what company you're in and what work you're doing. And if you can help a customer in times of difficulty, they are more likely to continue business in the future, and also they will remember how you were with them. So make sure that you keep up your contact. As I said, don't make it a payment call, but rather how you're coping from home, building that rapport, and just making sure that you can keep that human touch going. We do recognise as well that sometimes because of this situation, if you're in a collection role, you sometimes might feel a little bit less confident about reaching out to the customer to try and find out if they're going to pay. And I would say there is make sure that you're supporting one another, and you know, tell each other how you're doing, tell each other what methods you're using, so that the whole group of you adopt a similar way of working. So the relationships are vital in that. Okay, so if we look at the next slide, we will always say as well that when you're maintaining these relationships, very important that we look out for any warning signs that come along. So I've put a few things up here that you might see, that especially if you've put together a payment plan for a customer, you know, if money is tight, they might start the payment plan with all good intentions, but they might not keep to it rigidly. So it's looking out for that. Are they slipping? Are they, you know, all the agreements that you had, is that sort of going by the wayside? So look out for things like that. Look out as well that if other people tell you that they're having payment problems or whatever, and also look at the press comments. So, you know, we always say, look at Google, see what's going on, you know, watch the news, find out news feeds, etc. But look to find out what industries customers might be in that could be suffering. So do look at that. On our next slide, we also talk about something that we learnt from the past. And in order to go forward, we sometimes say, well, what happened before? Now, we know that 12 years ago, the credit crunch, the credit crisis, hit again on a global level. However, this is very different this time. Yes, it is global, and I would say that it's virtually every country, every type of business has been affected by COVID-19 situation. But what we understood from 2008 was that companies found it quite hard to get any new funding. I mean, at the moment, our government is propping up industry like nobody's business. This morning, the announcement was 1.6 billion to prop up TfL. So that's, Transport for London, and that's just London. So if you think about the enormous amount of money that's being put into the system at the moment to try and help, but coming out of it, those fundings might be withdrawn, and this is where it's, you're on your own now. It's up to you to get yourself back onto your feet. And we know then that if they couldn't gain any new funding, then they started to pull back on business growth because they couldn't see the way forward. They just had to do what they needed to do in order to just keep going. And that also meant that sometimes salespeople would take greater risks with new customers. So they would, as a credit team, you might look at risk and say, well, why ever did they start trading with that company? Because it's pretty obvious that they can't pay. But we wouldn't want that to happen. But I would say that that's probably going to be something we'll see coming probably in a year's time. A lot of companies also did the opposite, where they said, well, actually, we're very concerned about the situation, so therefore our risk assessment is going to be completely overhauled, and we are going to put in more checks and be more stringent with our criteria. So that's a little bit about being vigilant, but also learning from the past and what might happen. As I said, at the moment, everything's being propped up, but down the line, as funding starts to withdraw, then we might start to see other problems occurring. So I'm going to hand you back to Chris now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Organisations, we had a credit reference agency, a business information company, on the other week, talking about this, and he was discussing what other credit reference agencies are doing, what scoring is doing, because as you know, you apply for credit, you get credit scored. But those credit scores are all currently pre-COVID's credit scores. So the credit scores that companies are getting at the moment are based on what happened 2 to 3 months ago. Payment patterns 2 to 3 months ago. These things take time to come through, and scorecards, etc., haven't changed yet. And the emphasis on the call was very much that, as a business, and lots of organisations will sort of say, well, this is the credit score and it allows me to trade with this guy up to £10,000, so I'm just going to give him £10,000. What the credit scorers and the credit reference agencies are saying at the moment is, don't necessarily look at that. You need to probably think, well, is that correct? Should we think about just reducing that £10,000 by 20%? Because we know that it's going to be impacted. The payment patterns haven't come through yet. They're going to start to come through very shortly. And credit scores generally take a long time to develop and to be implemented and tested, etc. So organizations are very much aware of the fact that, well, we just need to be a bit more careful now, and taking a bit more responsibility rather than just saying whatever the credit reference agencies say. Additionally, because companies are slowing down on their payments, and because the cost of credit is increasing, so every time somebody delays payment, it costs a bit of money and it starts to reduce the margin, there's going to be a block of customers out there that you're going to think, actually, they're not profitable anymore. The ones that were on the margins of being profitable are suddenly not going to be profitable anymore. As 2008 happened in Shell, which Pam and I were working in Shell at the time, they actually ended up looking at all of their customer base and saying, right, some of these customers, they're not going to be profitable anymore. And they literally lost tens of thousands of customers during this time, and they handed them over to other organizations, to basically wholesalers, fuel wholesalers, because they thought they're not profitable for us anymore, so we don't really want to deal with them anymore. So this is how organizations are facing this now. So it is a very interesting time to be in credit, and it's a time which we should all, if we are in credit now, should take very much advantage of, and to demonstrate what we can do to the business, which leads us on to the final slide here. Organizations are currently looking at how they're going to be working in the future. The point is right now that future has not been determined yet. Yeah, everybody talks about the new normal, but we don't know what that is yet. We don't know how TfL are going to operate in 3-4 months' time. We don't know when the airports are going to come back online and how international travel is going to be impacted. We don't know any of these things. We also don't know how the offices are going to open again. What will social distancing mean? I was listening to a guy on the radio this morning from the World Health Organization saying we all now globally have a responsibility for social distancing. It's not just in individual countries and individual areas. We all do. So how is that going to change? We don't know exactly how businesses are going to operate in 3, 6, 9, 12 months' time. So we as credit professionals need to think about, right, okay, so what is our plan? What do we need to do? The issue that we have is that many times in the past, the accountants have made the decisions for us. And the accountants, God bless them, are not always the ones that are best placed to make a decision from an operational credit management point of view. They don't get it, to be honest. So we as credit professionals are the ones that need to take the lead rather than sit in the back office and expect it to be done to us. So we need to take the lead. So there are actions and leadership actions you can take that we should all be responsible for as credit professionals. The little blue boxes there, those are the 5 things that the British military do in managing in a crisis. Yeah, and there is another presentation that sits around this, but what we've tried to do is to summarize them in this point here. Mission command, basically what we're saying is that planning is a very important thing to do, and we all need to plan and understand what's going forward, but the plan itself is actually useless because things will change constantly. As soon as you put it down on paper, stuff will change. So you need to be as flexible as you can with your planning. And this is about trying to cover all of the bases. Now, you never will, but this is about trying to sort of keep it flexible and keep yourself on track with a single and good and strong mission. Clear the net is something there. That means basically simplicity of message. This is what we're going to do. Yeah, that's the important thing. This is what we're going to do. So the what, which is this is what we're going to do, and the how should be separated. The how is down to the people, the guys there, right? You're the ones that do the work. How are you going to do it? As they say, and as Michael Ryan said yesterday, an army doesn't march on its stomach. Yeah, an army actually marches with the sergeants. The overall objective is set by the higher paid, and then the sergeants are the one that actually implement it, the guys that on the ground that do the work. So separate the what and the how. This is what we need to do. How are we going to do that, group? And get the teams involved in how you're doing that. Don't wait too long to make decisions, and also don't make decisions too quickly. We've seen a number of organizations that have, as we have said, jumped too quickly. They've suddenly furloughed all their staff, they've shut all their offices, etc., not really thinking through what they needed to do. They didn't have the full picture of what it was going to be like. Like, for example, when suddenly the sales dry up, they furlough all of their salespeople, but then they can't manage the disputes and the queries because they've got nobody to help them. So jumping too soon is not a good idea, but also jumping too late is also not a good idea. So that 40 to 70, that is the percentage amount of knowledge that you need to make a good decision. Above 40%, below 70%. After 70%, it's too late. Before 40%, it's too early. So you have to be able to make decisions quicker. And the final one really is leadership through trust. If managers and leaders and middle managers, etc., are honest and say this is what's going to happen and are able to lead through trust, then people will follow them. Yeah, it is very important in the army, for example, that the leaders in the army are trusted, mostly because there's a whole bunch behind them with guns, right? So you've got to make sure that the guys in the front are trusted. Yeah, and it's at times like this when you see the managers that are trusted and the managers that aren't trusted based on how the teams react. So that's an important message. So in credit, we need to take the lead in these things. It is not up to us. It's not up to the accountants that should do this. And this is something that we put together early on in this crisis, and it's still very relevant now. The new normal has not yet been decided. It is whatever you want it to be. So as credit managers, you need to take that control, and you need to make that change. If you need to invest in systems and people and training, now is the time to try and ask for that, because let's be honest, the cash and credit management is very, very much at the forefront now. So now is the opportunity to ask for things that you probably wouldn't have got before, like, for example, automatic direct debit systems, etc., and systems and more automation to make you as a function more resilient, because there's a concern that this could happen again, and it could. And the old business continuity stuff that we've seen in the past, where people rent space in an office just in case their office collapses, clearly that is the renting of an office is clearly not relevant anymore, because literally people just got up, went home and worked. So it's a very different business now, and so it's not been decided. So we need to try and take more control over what you're doing as an organisation and as a function. So I'd like to, if anybody has got any questions, whether it's an operational question, what other companies are doing, it's entirely up to you what you want to ask. I'll stop the share for a moment, and we'll go back to full screen so we can see everybody. Has anybody got a question, or should I just pick on somebody? Because I've got some of the names there. It's up to you.
Can I just say something before that?
Yes.
Thank you very much, both of you, for doing that. Just, I mean, for the team, obviously where Pam's talking about customers, we're looking at that from them being our debtors rather than our customers. And it's still relevant to bear in mind what's been said, because we still have to consider the position our debtors might be in order to get engagement, in order to get payment, things like, when you're doing your company's house checks and whatnot, bearing in mind that what Chris said, that the information is based on pre-COVID data. So, when we're looking and judging the position in the company and what action we should take and advise our client, well then, all of that that's still really relevant for us. It's just different terminology, but we still have to consider all of these things that for our debtors, and notice where they might drop out of a payment plan. And I mean, I think it's common sense that the reason is COVID, but it may not be. And if we can try and keep that engagement going with them, we'll get more payments in, which obviously is what we want.
I'll stop the recording now, Anna, so that if anybody wants to ask any questions, so I'll just stop the recording. Okay.